Okay.
So thank you everyone for joining our AgRay webinar today. I'm very pleased to have Nidhi Ghani joining us today to discuss cybersecurity and digital health. Nidhi is a digital health and cybersecurity professional, and she spearheads the new product development and product security of Embecta's main product, which is the diabetes management system. She also teaches regulatory affairs and product development and digital health and cybersecurity at the Northeastern University in the US. And as well as that, Nidhi is the inaugural Cybersecurity Fellow at the Archimedes Centre for Healthcare and Medical Device Security. So I'm sure you'll all appreciate that Nidhi has vast experience in cybersecurity and digital health. And so I'm very pleased to be welcoming her to our AgRay webinar today to discuss this topic with you all.
Okay.
And I'll hand over to Nidhi. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Oren, and thank you for the opportunity, Stephen and Oren. Okay, let's get started. As we all know that as the pandemic came in, it has advanced digital health and cybersecurity fields. Of course, software was coming in slowly, but after the pandemic, it has accelerated the whole development, so much so that the regulators had to play catch up during that period. But I guess it's a good thing because the advancements in field have brought in a lot of good effects, I would say, and let's see what are those. And starting with what digital health is, there's not a proper definition as such, but according to Deloitte, the definition would be something that has interoperable data. It has also artificial intelligence. Then it's also like open and secure platforms focused on value-based care to improve quality of life. Until today, healthcare was not focusing a lot on value-based care, but now the focus has transitioned towards improving the quality of life using value-based care. In fact, even insurance companies are now using endpoints for their reimbursement strategies, where you can look at the value of life and quality of life. So from that standpoint, the value-based care has come into picture. And digital health has been, the market has been expected to grow up to $833 billion by 2027. And the advantages of digital health have been low operation costs, increased accessibility, because not a lot of people in the remote areas have access to doctors or even sometimes even hospitals. So increased accessibility and operation costs have become key. There's remote evaluation for the very same reason, instant remote consultation, and increased accuracy of diagnosis. This and also like early diagnosis and treatment. These two last areas are very key from the regulatory standpoint, be it EMEA or FDA or TGA bodies, because up till today, radiologists and doctors had to look through and sift through huge amounts of data, and that causes like fatigue. So when AI and machine learning come into picture, you have more accurate diagnosis. At least that is the aim. It all depends on the data sets that you would use, but it's also early diagnosis and treatment, and in fact even prevention as well, because one of the companies that I was working for before Embecta iCare, they had a software algorithm that could detect and diagnose breast cancer 2 years in advance. So that kind of a software, those kind of applications really impact human health on a larger scale. Going to like, what's the difference between e-health and m-health? Because there are two different categories. E-health comes in where you're talking about electronic medical records and also electronic health records. And then there is also mobile health when we are talking about Apple Watches and the data that you can see on your phone. But apart from that, you have like telehealth and telemedicine as well, where you're looking at remote consultation, remote diagnosis when you're talking to the doctor online. So these are like 4 categories, but here we will look deeper into mHealth, which is regulated by different notified bodies around the world, because that's where medical devices, it fits right in the medical devices realm. So long story short, actually I want to go here, but this is a better slide for a long story short. So this is taken from the Digital Medicine Society, where the digital health is like a broader umbrella term for all the softwares that we have seen: e-health, mHealth, telemedicine, and telehealth as well. In that, you have digital medicine, which is regulated by the FDA, where you have to show clinical evidence. What that means is, when you're looking at, say, for example, insulin management pumps, when you're looking at insulin management pumps, you have to validate to show that the device works as intended, and you're showing that clinical evidence on patients. And the difference between digital therapeutics and digital medicine is that in digital therapeutics, you need real world outcomes. What that means is, I will take an example between insulin management pumps and software that helps with, say, treating alcohol or substance use disorder. So a software that treats substance use disorder is a digital therapeutic, because it's a software as a medical device. It's going to be on your app. It's going to tell you what quotes to read, what therapies to take, should you breathe now, and what journal activities you should do. But when you're submitting to the FDA or any regulatory body, you have to show that when patients use the software, they are not going back to substance use disorder. They're able to be in the rehabilitation state for a longer time. In case of insulin management pumps, you're not showing that the diabetes levels or insulin levels are improving. You're only showing that the device works. The device works as intended. You're not showing real world outcomes with respect to how the insulin is improving and what impact it has on patients. So that's the difference between real world outcomes when it comes to digital therapeutics, because digital therapeutics mostly are pure softwares, and for them to be approved, you need to prove that, yes, if when you use the software versus when you don't use the software, when you use the software, the outcomes are better. So that would be a clear differentiation. And this is just the definitions of it and whatever I just explained. So I know the colors are a little bit everywhere, but I just like colors. So moving on to, now that we have set a stage between the different definitions of digital health, digital medicine, and digital therapeutics, I want to dive a little bit deeper into how the product life cycle looks. Right here in product life cycle, of course, it starts with research and development. It moves to design and development, where the whole regulatory product development comes into picture. Then you have manufacturing validations, clinical validations. Then after that comes the post-market surveillance, when you have moved to the post-market phase, whereas design and development is all in the pre-market phase. And throughout the life cycle, you're going through change management and risk management, right? So this is a product development life cycle, which I just want to put out there, but everyone's familiar with this, so I will not go much detail. But I want to talk about regulatory product development. So there's a difference between product development and regulatory product development. And in product development, generally what happens is you're not really talking about healthcare products or regulated products for that matter, because the development life cycle looks pretty simple, where you are, say, looking at developing a prototype, testing it with different users, and probably not even going for an approval, and then you're putting it in the market, and then you're trying to figure out your product market fit and validating it in the market for your business. But when it comes to product development from a regulatory standpoint, you have three main pillars that any regulatory body will look at, which is safety, effectiveness, and security. Earlier, it was only safety and effectiveness, but from 2023, after the omnibus law in the US, security has become the third feature, where you're looking at safety, effectiveness, and security, which is the cybersecurity piece, which we will talk later. So there's a clear divide between the pre-market and the post-market, and that divide is bridged using design controls and risk management. Design controls are basically where you're talking about how you're going to identify your risk. Like with the risk management, you first start with, you identify your risks, and then you figure out how you're going to mitigate the risk. For example, say you're developing a insulin management pump, since we are taking that example. So you're developing an insulin management pump. So the very first thing to do is identify the risk, figure out what can go wrong, and then build those features on it. And honestly, that applies to everything that you do. Even if you're building a bottle, instead of just trying to build a bottle from scratch, first figure out that, okay, what can go wrong with building a bottle, right? Maybe you're going to spill a lot of water on yourself. You're not able to hold it properly. The same thing with insulin management pumps, where you're thinking about the insulin is not being delivered like the way you want it to be delivered. The patch pump might just fall off from your arm. There's so many risks like that. So once you identify those risks, then you're going to say that, okay, I want the patch pump to sit on my arm for 3 straight days, waterproof. It's going to be made of so and so material. It's going to have the battery of, say, 48 hours, then it is going to be charged. All these different features are going to be built in. That's where your design controls come into picture. Your design controls are taking everything from your risk management and then figuring out, how do I now build this device safely, effectively, and securely? And then you move to the post-market phase, right? And having said that, as a regulator, from there on, you determine, say you're in a company and you're playing regulatory affairs, you're a professional. And so when product development is happening, what will you do as a regulator based on the product development features? First of all, understanding where in the product development lifecycle you are becomes important. And then you figure out, okay, determine if your product is a regulated medical device or not. Then you will classify and identify the predicate. Then you figure out what kind of software is it based on the intended use. And then after identifying what kind of software it is, then you identify the level of concern and software safety classification, which we will see throughout the presentation. But as we all know, the very first step is to determine if your product is a regulated medical device or not. And the way to do that is look at the definition of your medical device and then go on from there. So once you classify and identify a predicate, or even if you're just classifying your medical device, or even if you've just determined that, okay, if this is a regulated medical device, you need to identify what kind of software it is. So that's where different kinds of softwares will come into picture, and we'll look at different examples as well. So starting with software as a medical device, this is a very popular one that we've heard. Now softwares are a medical device, and it means that if your software is going to run without depending on any hardware, that would be software as a medical device. That generally is an algorithm. For example, algorithms that are used to detect and diagnose breast cancer. So this was an algorithm that would go through all the x-rays and then use different parameters like density of the breast and size of the tumor. Using different parameters, it will then calculate, okay, what's the risk to the patient, and how far are they from being diagnosed from breast cancer if they're using the prediction model. So such kinds of algorithms are software as a medical device, right? The next portion would be medical mobile application. In medical mobile application, these are generally apps that where you're able to see your different parameters. Say you're using Apple Watch, or if you're even using Fitbits, sometimes even like headphones, you can track your heart rate variability, blood pressure, oxygen rate, different kinds of parameters, and those are medical mobile applications, right? The other medical mobile applications are also where, like the insulin management pump, you have a pump on your arm, and your phone but your phone is responsible to deliver the insulin, because you're going to input all your values on the phone. You're going to say that I need to be delivered 1 unit of insulin this hour. So the pump and your phone are talking to each other, and when they talk to each other, because this is driving the medical device, which is your pump, it becomes a medical mobile application. If it was not driving insulin delivery, or if it was not if the risk was not as high, then it would have just been a mobile application like normal Fitbits and all of that. But because the intended use becomes very important, right? From a medical device standpoint, what is the device doing? The higher the risk, then it's regulated as well, that strictly. So that would be medical mobile application. Pretty simple to understand from the definition itself or the name itself. Moving on to Internet of Medical Things. We've all heard of Internet of Things because everything is connected to the network. But what is Internet of Medical Things? It is no different from Internet of Things. It's just that you are using this device for medical applications. Again, the insulin management pump, Apple Watch with ECG, if you are in a hospital where you're connected, your surgery room is connected through Wi-Fi, all these are Internet of Medical Things where you're looking at different applications. They are connected to each other. So that's where it becomes Internet of Medical Things. You're talking to each other via Bluetooth. They're connected to each other via Wi-Fi. Then the data is also stored and used for maybe diagnosis or detection or even prevention, monitoring. It depends. But when different devices are connected to each other, that's when it is called as Internet of Medical Things. Now, you must be thinking that what about the phone that you have? Is that a medical device or not? That FDA has clearly mentioned that is not, your phone is not a medical device. It is a commercial off-the-shelf platform where we are downloading the app. The app itself is regulated, but the phone is not regulated. But there are a little bit of nuances here, because if you're thinking about, sometimes the phone is also a medical device, and the example to that is, say that you have Cardia, the company Cardia, they have an ECG app. So they send you electrodes. Your electrodes are attached to your body, and they're also attached to the phone itself to give out ECG. So because the electrodes are talking to the phone and attached to the phone, now the phone is transformed into a medical device, although it was not a medical device earlier, but this the technology transforms the phone to a medical device. In that case, the phone is also regulated, but it is still it is regulated in form of compatibility and all of that, but it would not be as regulated as the other medical devices. It would still fall under the commercial off-the-shelf platform. And when we are looking at software in a medical device, until now, everything pretty much was software in a medical device. One of the examples for that would be critical care machines, where they're displaying parameters like heart rate, oxygen rate, blood pressure. So it has some kind of a software within it, but it's just part of another medical device that helps it function in a certain way. It's not a standalone medical device by itself, like how it would be in a software as a medical device, right? And the last part is clinical decision software. And for that, I have a different slide. Okay, I've taken this from the FDA's website. So one way to identify is your device a clinical decision software or not, or rather is the other way around. Is your clinical decision support software a device or not? So to figure that out, you have to look at these criteria here, which are in the round boxes, or yeah, which are in the round shaped boxes. And so if you do satisfy either of those, then you are a device, right? Like, but you have to meet all the 4 criteria. And let's look at an example here. Software that performs analysis of cerebrospinal fluid spectroscopy data to diagnose. We are already saying to diagnose tuberculosis, meningitis, right? So if you take that example and say your software does not acquire, process, or analyze medical images, signals, or patterns. In this example, it does not meet criteria 1, because our software is doing exactly the opposite. It is performing analysis of cerebrospinal fluid spectroscopy data. So it is analyzing signals and patterns from the spectroscopy data. So that's why automatically your device or the software is now a device. It's a clinical decision software, but it's also a device. In case if it would not meet any of these 4 criteria, or rather if it would meet all these 4 criteria, then it would still be a clinical decision software, but it would not be a device, which means it would not be regulated by the notified bodies. There are a lot of clinical decision softwares which, like for example, say you are transcribing patient notes into like a digital note-taking software. It is still aiding doctors' decision making because they're collecting notes, but it's not a device because it's not helping in diagnosis, or it's not like analyzing anything. It is not helping make recommendations. Neither is it being treated as a medical device, because it is not also like meeting the definition of a medical device, which is diagnosis, treatment, monitoring, prevention, cure, and all of that. So the way to read FDA guidances or any of the guidances would be to really read the guidance, because every time you read the guidance, you can figure out very different meanings from that. The more you understand the concept or your product or regulatory affairs in general, the regulation also starts to make a very different sense to you, just like how you're reading books. So go to the FDA's website or any of the notified bodies website, look at what the regulation says. They have examples there. You can use them to see what criteria it fits in, and then figure out whether it's a device or not. And that applies to all the different kinds of softwares we are talking about. In my classes, I like to say that regulatory affairs is a lot of common sense. And if you're really looking into the regulations and you're like good with interpreting regulations, then you can be a good regulatory affairs professionals. So moving on to the 4th part, which was once you've identified what kind of software it is, you now have to identify the level of concern and software safety classification. Of course, you are already deciding if it's a medical device. Is it class 1, class 2, class 3? That is a separate classification. Once you have done that classification within the medical device realm, you have to classify the software as well, because the classification of software becomes important for you to decide how much documentation you have to submit to the notified bodies. That's why figuring that out, and obviously even for risk controls as well, it is important to understand what classification your software will fall under. So the level of concern and safety classification actually come from two different standards. The level of concern comes from the FDA guidance, where you're looking at minor, moderate, major. Minor is where there is no, it's not going, there is no injury or design flaws that are going to cause like death and all of that to the patient. From that standpoint, minor, it's going to be minor, which is pretty simple. Moderate is if the failure is going to cause some kind of a minor injury, then you're going to classify it as moderate, and we'll see how we can do that. In terms of major, it's going to be death or serious injury, so that's where you classify your level of concern as major. But with EN 62304, which is a design and development life cycle guidance for software, you're utilizing that. Because you're using 62304 for design and development of the software, you have to use their classification, which is A, B, C, A being the least risky and C being the highest risk classification. And because based on both of these guidances, you will then decide how much of documentation you should submit to the FDA. But to identify, does your device fall under minor, major, or moderate, you have to answer these questions. There are like around 10 to 11 questions in major level of concern. You have to ask, like, does the software device qualify as a blood establishment, or is it a life supporting function, or does it have potential harm energy that could result in death? So you have to answer all these questions and then figure out if you've answered yes to any of these questions in the major level of concern, then yes, it straight away falls under major level of concern. If you've answered no to all the questions in major level of concern, then you move to moderate level of concern and ask the below questions. If you say yes to any of those, then you're a moderate level of concern. If not, then you are a minor level of concern. Many times there is a confusion where just from the classes that I take and the assignments that students do, when they look at, say, example is a device is looking at AFib, which is atrial fibrillation. The intended use is to detect atrial fibrillation. For some reason, students, when they look at it, answer the level of concern questions, they always choose moderate level of concern, because I guess the thought process behind that is the doctor is making the final decision. So this flaw is not really going to result in a serious injury or death, or any of, or like require serious treatments and therapy. But what we are looking at here is, we are not looking at how much how better decision making comes from the doctor itself. We are looking at figuring out, can the software perform as intended, right? When you're looking only at how the software performs, that's where you can clearly say that when you're looking at AFib patterns or devices, it is a major level of concern, because if the diagnosis shows wrong, or if there are like false positives or false negatives, the doctor might take it for its face value and prescribe medications accordingly, because the doctor is relying on the software. The doctor may not be completely the doctor is making the final decision, but the doctor is majorly relying on the device itself. And that's why many times we see that although it is major level of concern, we tend to move towards moderate. But as regulators, we need to understand that these devices can cause serious injury, and always consider the highest risk. And the way to do that is, when you're looking at the safety classification, by default, the software is class C. When you're starting to look at, okay, how do you classify your software? You're not starting with, is it A, least, then go to B? No, you are directly reaching at class C, because software is 0 or 1. Right? Because I mean, no pun intended, although the code is written in 0 and 1, but it's either or, because it's either going to cause serious injury or it is not going to cause serious injury. It does not depend on the way you code. Like when it comes to hardware, the way the design is built, you can reduce the risk. But when it comes to software, it really does not depend on the kind of software programming language you have used, or the programming environment it was built in. It does not matter. That's why you should always consider safety classification for software as maximum, which is C. And then ask a question as to, can a hazardous situation arise from a failure of the software? If says no, then it's class A. But if it says yes, then evaluate effectiveness of risk control measures external to the software. The word external to the software is very key here, because like I said, there is no way you can say that I wrote the code well. That does not fly by, and it does not make any sense. So looking at the external factor is important. Like, for example, again, taking the insulin management pump example, right? You know that one of the risks is the insulin is being delivered ineffectively, or say that the person is going through hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia because the insulin was delivered very high or very low. But you can have these checks in the software, where you can say that, okay, if the insulin is being delivered above unit 5 for more than 1 hour, then the alarm will start to ring. This alarm is the external factor which will immediately shut down the pump, so that you are avoiding that risk. So that's one of your risk control measures, right? So the external to the software is important. Only when you can use something external to the software to reduce the risk, that's when you can safely say that, okay, I have reduced the risk. So when you evaluate effectiveness of risk control measures external to the software, then you can ask a question: can failure to the software result in an unacceptable risk? No. If yes, what is the severity? And then figure out, is it class B or class C? And the other ways to do it would be write a warning in the IFU, because that's one of the ways that you can mitigate risks. So software classification would be default C, and then figure out how you are reducing the risk. So based on answering if your level of concern was minor, moderate, or major, these are all the submission requirements. For minor, you're not submitting everything, anything after revision level history, but for moderate, you are submitting, moderate and major, you're pretty much submitting a lot of more documents like architecture design chart, software design specification, and all of that. And the interesting part of software or interoperable devices is that throughout the whole system, you can break it down component by component. Again, taking the insulin management pump example, there are different components here, right? Your pump is one of the component, your phone is one of the component, your cloud is one of the components, and the app is the other component, your Bluetooth is the other component, your Wi-Fi is the other component. So you have to consider everything in the whole system, and then think about where each one falls. The pump falls under major, but the cloud does not fall under major, because the cloud is being used only to store data. So at that point, your level of concern becomes minor. So for the cloud, you don't need to submit architecture design chart and design specifications and all that. So these are important, because this changes your design considerations very early on. If you already know that, okay, I'm going to design my device in such a way that I don't have to submit a lot for the cloud. So you're going to make those deliberate design decisions that your risk controls are not placed in the cloud. You'll place them somewhere else. right? So these kind of decisions are important to make. One of the examples would be alarms, right? You can place the alarms on your patch pump during hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, or you can place the alarms on the phone. Now, if you place the alarms on the phone, your phone becomes regulated because it is part of risk control now, risk mitigation. So your phone becomes regulated. If you already had considered these in your risk management plan, you will say that, okay, let me move the alarms from the phone to the pump, so I don't have to submit a lot of documentation for the phone. That's why risk management becomes very important right in the beginning to influence design decisions throughout the life cycle. So having said that, I will move to cyber wars, and we will move through quickly, right? So if cyber wars were, if cyber crime damages were measured, then it totals up to 6 trillion USD in 2021, and that was just getting started. And and that would be world's third largest economy after US and China. In 2021, 45 million individuals were affected by healthcare attacks, and it's only going to be increasing. Cybersecurity is like a defense system, just like Air Force, Army, and Navy, but for the internet. And it's not about, when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not about when, it's not about if, what if we are attacked. It's when is that attack going to come in? Because it's not just about somebody is going to find your company and attack, but it's also where you're using different components procured from different companies, right? If when you're making the insulin management pump, you're procuring firmware from a different company, you're procuring the phone, which is the operating system, from a different company, you're procuring authorization strategies from different companies. Just like your hardware, you're procuring different raw materials for building your software as well. And when you're procuring different raw materials from outside, you lose control over those raw materials. It's exactly the same for the software. The vulnerabilities will come from your raw materials. The main security objective is to, of course, maintain data security. And there are three things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So you're making sure that your data is confidential. You're going to make sure that the data that is being transferred from the medical device to the cloud and back to the medical device is all protected, and the same data is going to be talking throughout. We don't want the data to be hacked when it is moving from the device to the cloud. Right in between, when it is traveling, we don't want the data to be hacked or manipulated, because that is going to cause serious repercussions. That's why the integrity of data should be maintained throughout. Next comes the availability, because when you, in case of a cybersecurity incident, you need to always make sure that you are prepared with all the data that you have stored, right? To make sure that the product is still functioning. Because when people are using high risk devices, say during surgery platforms or even with insulin management pumps, you don't want a hack to completely stop your device. Or even if it has stopped, your design should be built such a way that you can switch off the pump and they should be exactly starting from where they left off, because you can transfer that data that you are storing in the cloud with integrity and confidentiality. It is still available to them. So these three are important pillars of security objectives. And it's not just when you're building the device, right? It's throughout the supply chain. When you're developing it, when you are sending it, like shipping it and storing it in your warehouse, when you are even manufacturing it, when you are deploying those updates to your users, when it is operating, be it abnormal use or normal use, everything should be functioning as is. And maintenance also comes into picture, and also decommissioning, because you don't want the device to be just thrown or discarded and with all the patient data there. You want to be erasing and taking care that everything is wiped off securely, right? So it's not just during the development, it's throughout the supply chain. Just like how it would be for hardware, you're taking care of the entire supply chain. And some of the most common cybersecurity jargons could be assets, threats, threat actors, vulnerabilities. You must have heard about these. But assets are basically what is important to your business and your product, and you can divide them between software, hardware, and information. What are your software inventories? What are your hardware inventories? What information are you storing? So figure those assets out. Threats are like, ransomware, malware, denial of service, where you're not able to use your device anymore. Threat actors they could be terrorists. It could also be state-sponsored actors and hacktivists who are really not they're just looking for fame and not money, but they are just excited to see what devices are hackable. Vulnerabilities is something where, there is a flaw in the system, but and how quickly threat actors can attack the system and shut your device down. So every system is going to have vulnerabilities, but you need to figure out how you're going to make it difficult for the threat actors to attack you. That it's a fun game to play from that standpoint, right? And so when you're looking at building security, like in your risk assessment, you are looking at only safety risk assessment. But here we are talking about security risk assessment, because there are three pillars. When you're proving effectiveness, you're proving it through your validation. When you're proving safety, you are proving it through your safety risk management, right? But what about security? For security as well, because security directly affects patient safety, you are looking at security as a third pillar, and you have to build a secure product lifecycle, right, to manufacture safe and effective devices. And part of secure development product lifecycle would be all these different things, where there is a threat model, there's a risk assessment, you have cybersecurity requirements, you have supplier controls, how you're going to build the architecture. There's also labeling. So there are like different parts to it, and you're taking care of everything from start to end. And but one thing I want to leave with y'all is, or take home, is that always start your security life cycle with a threat model. A threat model is very important because it comes right in the beginning. How you start your product development with risk management, with risks, you start security with threat model, and then comes the risk management. So it fits right here in the beginning, where you're talking about product security risk assessment. And then the same thing that you identified your security risks, you're going to have security requirements, you're going to validate your security requirements, and then post-market, you're going to check for adverse events and complaints and all of that. It's the same process, it's just for security. And like I said, the threat model will feed into design consideration, and it'll also feed in your risk management. The risk management always also feeds into the design and development. So it starts with your threat model, it feeds into security risk assessment, it feeds into security requirements, you verify, validate, and then you submit to the FDA. And just to emphasize a little bit more, we know the risk management, safety risk management regulation number is ISO 14971, and the IEC 8001 is the I think it's the security risk. It's not the security risk management, but it has something to do with security. And recently, these both have been merged together to form a new definition of harm, which is physical injury or damage to the health of people, or damage to property or the environment. That was the earlier safety. It's the safety definition of harm. After the security came into picture, you're adding or reduction of effectiveness, basically making basically where the device is not going to function as intended, or there is a breach of data or system security, right? So the security risk management is AMI 57, TIR 57, and for pre-market. For post-market, it is the AMI TIR 97. So if you see here, the security and safety risk management plans are talking to each other. Because security risk management directly affects patient safety, you can use those risks to feed into your safety risk management. So that's why they're talking to each other. And if you look at this security on the right side, security risk and safety related risk, in between you have security risk with safety impact. So you cannot do without each other anymore. And that's why both these standards and both these processes of security and safety go hand in hand, and they have to talk to each other. And the important documents are the Joint Security Plan, which is basically this one. And you have the FDA guidance, which talks about cybersecurity in medical devices, where the quality system considerations and there is also a content of pre-market submission, this post-market management, and the other two that we just spoke about. In security, it's not just pre-market, it's also post-market, because in software and security, right? Because there's only so much you can anticipate and foresee in a software and security, but by the time you have developed and deployed, there are numerous vulnerabilities, numerous tools that can hack into the system. So your legacy of the software begins day one. The day you've made it, the day it becomes vulnerable. So you need a very good post-market management plan. A pre and post-market management plan are both responsible for a good submission. You cannot do without each other, because the post-market management plan really takes care of all the complaints that come from the market. Even hardware, of course, has a post-market management plan, but it is not as intense as it is for software and security. Having said that, cybersecurity is not just a feature that you would just bolt on once your design and development is done. It is more of a culture, and it has to be baked into design and development, just like how you would bake safety and effectiveness to produce a good medical device. So cybersecurity is a culture, and as regulatory affairs professionals, let's try to build a good one. Thank you. Any questions so far? Or, I mean, any questions, basically?
Thank you very much for that excellent summary of cybersecurity presentation, Nidhi.
Thank you.
I think we've seen a lot of cybersecurity breaches in other systems, in banking systems and things like that recently. How do you assure patients that they're not going to have their pacemaker or other device that they're relying on hacked?
Yeah, that's the kind of trust a company has to build between the patients, the regulators, and for themselves as well, because I think the trust will come from building a good security culture within your quality management system, right? It has to be part of your quality management system. It cannot be separated from it. That's why the regulation also talks about considerations for quality system and pre-market submission. So it's part of the whole system. You're building trust with the FDA, you're building trust with the patients as well, because it's not just patient safety that is affected, it's actually also business risk and reputational risk. Because if there are a lot of breaches, patients will not choose your device. They would rather go for a different device. So it's a two-way street, I would say. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Stephen.
So thank you, Professor Garni, for a very informative and very insightful talk. I really like the way that you very clearly segmented the different types of digital health platforms, into 3 different layers with, different regulatory requirements for each layer. But one thing I am curious about is when you have that 3rd dimension of security, into the safety and efficacy assessment, right? Just like on the biopharmaceutical side, we have these drug master files to, to tell FDA we're working with these proprietary materials. We don't want to disclose the nature of them to the general public, but, we want you as FDA to consider this, when you're evaluating, let's say, our marketing application, right? So I'm thinking about an analogy, let's just say, for example, on the cybersecurity side, right? And so let's say, somebody, came up with an epiphany, or some organization that said that, okay, this cybersecurity platform, yeah, it aligns with these standards, right? But we've made it so that it's impossible to hack into this device, right? Just for the sake of example, right? And let's say that they then go and they, depending upon what country they're in, they build an intellectual property portfolio around that, right? And so I guess my question is, I mean, do you foresee a day, or how do you think FDA would handle that in an analogous fashion to, let's say, a drug master file? Do you think it would be possible to do that? I guess is the first question. And then secondarily, how would you regulate that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So the parallel to drug master file is the SBOM, which I did not have the time to go through, but the SBOM, which is a software bill of materials, right? So that's where you are submitting to the FDA all the components that are present within your system, to show that you are going to constantly monitor and assess the vulnerabilities in those systems, in those raw materials, in the software bill of materials, right, that you are procuring. So your software bill of materials is going to have all different raw materials that have been used to build the software. And every raw material is going to have its own vulnerability. And that's why you're going to have a separate team to look at different vulnerabilities every month, or even every 6 months. It's a routine process. So that I would like think about the SBOM as your drug master file. And the other part is also, FDA will also look at your penetration testing. So when you're submitting to the FDA, you have to submit a report of a penetration testing, which is basically you hire a third-party vendor to break your system. When you're trying to break that system, you get to know many different vulnerabilities, and then the company will go back and fix those vulnerabilities and show that report that, okay, this is how it was fixed. And it's impossible to have a system that is 100% secure. It's just not possible. So yeah.
We can dream, I guess, but yeah, that's very interesting. I actually was not aware, that there such a thing as a software bill of materials actually existed. So
Yes.
that's helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting topic, and 1 hour is not enough. Actually, even 6 weeks are not enough for the class. But yeah, but this is like an overview, which at least from here, probably like people can go Google more and stuff like that.
Do we have any other questions? I've just got one. It might be a bit off the topic, but how does the FDA view your AI programs that you're using in your software when it's unstructured
Can
and
you repeat that?
unsupervised learning systems? So like the large language models that that we're seeing with ChatGPT, etc. If you were using something like that, we can't really tell the data set that it's learning from, because it's just learning from lots of things. How do they view those kind of the softwares?
That has been a challenge after all the learning models have come into picture. But I guess one of the ways that they're trying to regulate it is by looking into the kind of data sets that the algorithm is trained with, and the quality of the data sets and the diversity of the data points as well. and then going from there, validating, and also like I think the other part to it is putting it out there to gather real world evidence and real world data, because it's like a catch-22 situation. We are not going to approve it, it's not going to learn from the real world data, and we don't want to like approve it because it's not safe and effective, but it's never going to learn if it's not going to be out there. But yeah, the data sets are quite challenging because there's so many data sets just available on the internet. I feel like everyone's systems have been validated to the same data sets.
We've just got a question in the chat. So when data is collected on consumer wearables or software platforms, how is compliance with Part 11 managed both by FDA and industry?
So I don't think like Part 11 is more for electronic signatures, right? So I don't think that applies, but sure, from the consent standpoint, if you're talking about that, yeah, that would fall under like the HIPAA regulations, right? Because there are two kinds of data. One is the patient health information, the other is patient identifiable information. If you're talking about the patient identifiable information, like your name, gender, date of birth, all of that, then that data is stored anonymized. That's HIPAA rules will apply there, and like, or GDPR rules if it's outside of the US. But if you're looking at patient health information, which means all your heart rates, heart rate variabilities, all of that information, that is part of companies' proprietary data, because they're going to look at that data for your product to learn better as well in the future. And also, if there is a security incident, you know exactly where what went wrong. So that's how it is stored, and the reason that it is stored for. But there are regulations around it, like for how long you're going to store it and how you're going to protect it. Again, those three things: confidentiality, availability, integrity, all that will come into picture, right? So yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll draw the webinar to a close. So I just wanted to extend my thanks again, Nidhi, for sharing your valuable expertise with everyone on the call and who are watching the recording. So I hope everyone has a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. And you can reach out to me with any questions on LinkedIn. I'm more active there. So yeah, feel free. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.